This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Geostations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations. Every family has secrets. You know, grandma may have had a child out of wedlock before she married your grandfather, and the list goes on, but not knowing your husband was a serial killer, talk about the extreme. Well, this isn't some Hollywood fiction movie, but this was the true story of Judith Ridgway and her husband, Gary Ridgway, who would become known as the Green River serial killer. Today we have author Pennie Wood talking about her experiences of sitting down with Judith and going through the 14 years that they were married and then finding out her husband was a serial killer. And Gary convicted of 49 murders, but confessing to over 70 murders. Well, today it's Truth Be Told, True Crime. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, author Pennie Wood. Hello, hello.
Good afternoon.
Well, Pennie, first of all, thank you for being here and going to share your research. I always say I love having people like yourself because I don't have to do the research. You've done it for us, so we just get to enjoy the ride.
Thank you, Tony, and it's good to be talking with you today.
Well, we're going to be talking about your book. She Married the Green River Serial Killer, the story of an unsuspected housewife. Well, can you kind of enlighten us, for a lot of us that may have not heard of the Green River Killer? We've heard of, like I said earlier before we started, you know, Charles Manson, and we've heard about Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, but a lot of us haven't heard about the Green River Killer. Could you kind of catch us up on that, and then we'll jump into the real story of Judith?
Right, Tony. It seems that Ted Bundy is the most, popular of the current day serial killers. And I understand from television producer people that Ted Bundy gets the highest ratings on documentaries. And I asked one, why is that? Killing is killing, right?
Right.
And I was told, well, because he's rather handsome. And women like sort of Ted Bundy. They like the way he looks, and they're more fascinated with him. And I find that to be interesting. Gary Ridgway was also a brutal killer, and he may not be considered as handsome or as charismatic as Ted Bundy, but he did brutalize, torture, and kill many, many, many women.
Yeah, and it always fascinates me. You know, many of us go through hard times, and many of us, you know, go through depressions and abuse in our family. But you know, we didn't turn out to be a serial killer, and it fascinates me to the mindset of a person that can take them to that, stepping over that line and start killing other people, not even self-defense, but just for pleasure, for sexual reasons, and it just baffles me that our minds get to that point. Have you, besides just the book itself, have you done your research on serial killers as a whole?
I haven't gone into great depth into all the serial killers. True crime isn't even my favorite genre, I must admit. I'll tell you, when I read true crime, it gives me bad dreams, and it's frightening. My approach in writing this book was to tell the true story, the biography, the intimate details of a woman who married a serial killer and who had no idea for the entire duration of their courtship and marriage what he was doing on the side. And that really blew my mind. I couldn't understand how that could be possible. But I agree with you, Tony. I've said almost the same words you just said prior to this, and that is, How is it that so many of us were abused as children, or we suffered some tragedy? Some people lose their parents in a car accident. The list goes on. Why did we not go out and murder people for sport? And so I've been asked on other programs that I've done multiple times, Pennie, after studying Gary and learning about him through his wife, what made him a serial killer? Is he evil? Is he possessed with the devil?
Serial killers as a whole?
I haven't gone into great depth into all the serial killers. True crime isn't even my favorite genre, I must admit. I'll tell you, when I read true crime, it gives me bad dreams frightening. My approach in writing this book was to tell the true story, the biography, the intimate details of a woman who married a serial killer and who had no idea for the entire duration of their courtship and marriage what he was doing on the side. And that really blew my mind. I couldn't understand how that could be possible. But I agree with you, Tony. I've said almost the same words you just said prior to this. And that is, how is it that so many of us were abused as children, or we suffered some tragedy? Some people lose their parents in a car accident. The list goes on. Why did we not go out and murder people for sport? And so I've been asked on other programs that I've done multiple times, Pennie, after studying Gary and learning about him through his wife, what made him a serial killer? Is he evil? Is he possessed with the devil? Is he just damaged? His brain damaged? Did something happen?
In the mind of someone to take it to that extreme. But Judith, she seemed like complete opposite of Gary. But first of all, how did you even get interested in the Green River killings? And then how did you meet Judith? And then we'll get into how she even let you in to explore that, many years that she spent with him.
Those are great questions. This is not something that I went looking for.
Oh, wow.
This came to me in a million years. I wouldn't have imagined that I would meet the wife of the Green River serial killer who was in hiding. So to tell you how I met her, I would need to go back quite a few years. My son was a motocross racer and traveled the motorcycle circuit in the Pacific Northwest. And it's kind of like NASCAR or rodeo in that we go to events and see the same competitors and the same families over and over and over in every town, right?
Right.
So in one city in Washington State, we our family became friends. There was a strange act of serendipity, but we don't have time to go into that today. We became friends with a couple, a very nice couple named Jim and Linda. And they were at the motocross track to watch their grandson race. So over the years, we became friends. And there was this big day in the news in Seattle. It was November 30th, 2001. The Green River killer, they told us, was finally captured after a 2-decade killing streak.
Wow.
We were at a motocross race, and the couple approached me that we had become friends with and asked if they could speak with me in private. I said, of course. We stepped into our RV. And they said, you heard that Gary Ridgway was arrested, and they say that he is the Green River killer. And I said, yeah, I saw that on the news. Finally, this guy was a legend. And we didn't think he would ever be caught, over 20 years.
Right.
And they said, Jim Bailey said, he's my best friend.
Oh, my God.
And
wow.
I said, what? He said,
Wow.
yeah, we work together at Kenworth Trucks, a facility where they build and paint 18-wheelers here in the Seattle area. And he said, this is nonsense. So Jim Bailey was outraged. He was offended. He was hurt. And he said, this can't be right. They have a huge list of suspects and they're just picking on my friend. So that's how the conversation started. And we would talk privately at every race that we went to subsequently. And Jim and Linda became even more outraged. They told me that they were best friends with Gary and his wife Judith, that they in fact went out to dinner together, they went to union meetings together, they went on vacations together, and they were planning to retire at about the same time so that they could travel the country in their motorhomes. As time went on, it took 2 years of Gary sitting in jail. So he was arrested 2001. In 2003, he finally confessed because they did have DNA evidence.
Right. Wow.
Linking him to the body. So once he confessed, it was a whole new world. Then Jim and Linda went into deep, deep mourning, and so did Judith, the wife. And that's when, at another race, Jim and Linda Bailey asked me if I would maybe want to go visit their friend, Judith. And I said, why? What, me? Why? I don't understand. And they said, well, she's in such a desperate place. We're worried about her. She's not taking good care of herself. She's terribly depressed. And, you know, we like talking to you. Maybe you could talk to her.
Right.
And that's how it all started.
That's what's interesting, is because it is fascinating that she would let you even into her world of reliving those moments. Not only, I mean, it sounded like she had some good years with him, but the moments of finding out who he was, and, you know, not only it affected her, but every family that he's ever, you know, murdered one of these young girls. And I think I have a picture of just some of the women that he murdered. How did you first approach her, as in sitting down with her? Because you have to be kind of delicate when you're, I would think, in trying to, you know, relive these moments with her. How was it the first time sitting down with her? How did you approach it to start getting the story?
You're right, Tony. Delicate, beyond delicate. So Jim and Linda Bailey took me to meet Judith for the first time. And at that time, this was just after Gary had confessed. So it was 2003. And Judith feared for her life. Mm-hmm. She had gone into hiding. She was in a different location. She refused to open her curtains. They stayed closed all the time. She was afraid to go out to her mailbox. She dyed her hair a different color, and she changed her last name. She went back to her maiden name. Wow. And she was afraid that the public and relatives of the victims would blame her,
retaliate,
and say, come on, you must have known something. You were married to the guy. Maybe you knew. Maybe you were covering up for him. Oh my gosh, maybe you even assisted him in some way. So she feared for her life. And it was underscored by the fact that the police, the King County Police, scooped her up the day that the news broke, November 30th, 2001. They literally scooped her up. She was allowed to grab a few clothes and personal items, and they took her to a safe place just because they were concerned about how the public would react.
Right. I mean, that makes sense.
Right. So it's kind of like you see in the movies.
Right.
The police come and say, quick, gather some things, we're going to go. But why? Where are we going? Come on, we have to go now. So that was very dramatic and very upsetting for her. But you asked about her kind of state of mind, or how she was. I can tell you, I was witnessing the most wounded woman I had ever met in my life. It was in her eyes. It was the way
I'm
she
sure.
trembled. Her voice was so trembly she could barely speak. She was in a state of trauma. And I also noticed that she constantly picked at her hands. I observed that she had wounds on the palms of her hands because she was obsessively picking skin at her hands. So it wasn't what I would call a productive meeting. It wasn't really a two-way conversation.
Right.
It was just me going, oh, holy cow, this woman is desperately traumatized. And I just, at that point, I was just a curious person.
Well, yeah. I mean, as a writer, I'm sure you have to be a curious person.
That was it. I just thought, how did you get here? You poor woman. And what can I do to help you? And at one point, she jumped up and just came over to me and gave me the biggest hug. And we were strangers. And she just hugged me. And I just sort of awkwardly hugged her back. I really didn't know what to say. And she just said, I feel as though I can trust you.
Oh, see, that's when you can get the real story, when somebody feels like they can trust that you have their best interest. And I think that's, like you said, won her over when it comes to sharing the story.
And again, I wasn't thinking book. My friends from motocross asked me to meet their traumatized friend. And I said yes, out of loyalty to my friends. I wasn't imagining a book at that point.
They spent 14 years together. 14 years is, I mean, you get to know someone, well, you feel like you get to know someone very well. Like my spouse, sneezes, it comes in threes. There's all kinds of traits. You know what's going to happen. You kind of know their traits, and they don't like, salt on their food. Knowing him, it's almost like he had two different lives. And somebody in the chat room says, what was your thoughts on the ability to have two lives? But that's a whole side of him that, did she ever see any inkling that he might have been, angry? You know how sometimes you get mad at somebody and you tell your spouse, I just want to beat the crap out of him. I mean, did she ever see that in Gary? Was she abused at all, or?
You may not believe this, but no.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
What pulled me into this story so deeply and so seriously is that when I continued to visit Judith, and I thought, just as a human being, from one woman to another woman, if she feels like she can trust me, maybe I'm someone she can talk to, and maybe she can start to begin to heal. I had no notion of doing a book at that time. Mm-hmm. But as she began to know me more, and our trust and friendship began to build, she started telling me about not only the events that took place during her blissful 14 years of marriage to Gary Ridgway, but she started to mention things earlier in her life. And that's what pulled me. And I would say, wait, stop. What? What did you just say? And she would tell me something horrific from her childhood. Just the most unbelievable. The whole spectrum of her life has been filled with crises and disasters. And
her
trauma.
life was.
Her life. And so when I did get to the point of saying, you know what, Judith, it's very rare for someone to be married to a serial killer. The FBI profilers tell us that they're often loners. They use that word a lot, loners. Maybe long distance. In fact, there was a profile created while they were searching for Gary Ridgway, which included he could be ex-military, ex-police officer, really strong chance that he's a long-haul truck driver and cruises through Washington every now and then, and no close personal relationships. And guess what? It was all wrong. This guy was living a married man with a child, with a stable job, he won perfect attendance records at work. He was such a good employee, so dedicated. So, Tony, he really was living two lives. But as I was mentioning earlier, what pulled me into this whole Judith story is that her whole darn life was a disaster. And so when she met Gary, ironically, it started the best 14 years of her life, the most healthy, the most peaceful. She felt the most loved, and they had this amazing compatibility. And we know from divorce counselors that there's two kind of major things that bust couples up, and that is sexual compatibility and financial compatibility, right? What we do with our money and what we do with our sex lives. These two were so unbelievably on the same page in both of those areas. They were both happy. And
I was going to ask about if they, like their sexual relationship, but I mean, that's, wow. Interesting.
And you know, I interviewed Gary after he went to prison.
Oh, you did?
I did. I was the first person. There's been a couple subsequently, but I was the first person to interview him, and he was shockingly candid. I tape recorded the whole thing. And he told me that he'd never been so happy in his life, that he genuinely loved Judith, and that his desire to kill actually went down during those 14 years. Oh my God.
Good thing, but I mean, unfortunately, it could have been hundreds of people. Wow.
Right. I mean, he did continue to kill. He never completely stopped during those 14 years, but he did tell me that she made him so happy, and they never fought. And they were just so compatible in all of those areas. They had the same retirement plans, the same financial goals. There was no reason to fight.
But what was, okay, I was going to think if she had such a kind of a dramatic and traumatic life, you know, growing up, she may have not even noticed a lot. You know, because a lot of times people go from drama to drama to drama in relationships until you finally realize and change it. You know, hopefully making that choice to change it. But it sounds like, you know, it was a pretty good relationship. So we know about hers, but what about his childhood? What was it like? Did you ever get a chance to ask about his childhood, how he grew up? And
I did. And I think that's a fair question that you bring up, Tony. Did Judith have on clear lenses when she looked at it? Right. And actually, she was hypersensitive, she told me, to looking for those signs of an abusive man. If your readers care to, and they read the book, they can learn all about her first marriage. And it was bizarre and crazy and abusive. So Judith had her feelers out there, and she was extremely cautious when she met Gary and was looking for those bad signs. But he checked all the boxes. He surprised her at being what she said was so normal. So yeah, fair question, but she did not see any of those danger signs that she had experienced in that first awful marriage. So what was Gary like?
I was going to say, what was Gary like? Because that's fascinating.
Gary is one of three brothers. His father was a metro bus driver here in the Seattle metro area. His mother worked at a department store, J.C. Penney, if they're still around. She worked at J.C. Penney as a sales clerk. She was a lovely woman, according to Judith. Now, Judith absolutely loved her in-laws after she married Gary and became close with his family. Again, father bus driver, mother sales clerk at J.C. Penney, and two brothers. Now, Gary did struggle in school. He had the most difficulty with academics. And he did graduate 2 years later. I believe he was 20 when he graduated high school, finally. He had tremendous difficulty with reading and writing. But what I discovered later during the research, and according to Jim Bailey, his best friend there at Kenworth, Jim Bailey described Gary as a genius.
Really?
Why? If he had trouble reading and writing,
Right.
how
Was
could
it
he be
because he was bored or because he was so smart?
according to his best friend and coworker, Jim Bailey, Gary had this photographic memory and that he could memorize schematics and blueprint drawings of trucks. And so they would play games down there at Kenworth, and they would say, "Hey, Gary, remember a 1978 something 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 truck?" And Gary could bring up all of the details. And Gary, I noticed, had that special ability in remembering where he placed the many, many bodies in sort of a vast wooded area, both along the Green River and expanding out into the forest as we head up to the Cascade Mountain Range. It was as if he kind of in his mind look down topographically at the region, and he could remember where they were.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know if you remember I'm from Kansas. I grew up in a small town, but I went to college in Wichita, Kansas, and Dennis Lynn Rader, the BTK killer.
BTK killer.
Yeah.
Find, torture, kill.
Yeah. And he was another one, had a wife. He worked for a local, I think he was a animal control, worked, involved in the church. In fact, that's how they caught him, because he sent a email from a church computer, and they traced it back to that church. That's how they discovered it. But, nobody would have guessed he would have been a serial killer. But even though they did say that he had an angry side to him, and that's why I was kind of interested to see, maybe, during his marriage year, he was good, but childhood, was there any drowning animals or anything that he went through as a kid where he was abused or sexually abused or claimed he was, or any torturing anything?
Yes, you're right. As a child, Gary did show some of those classic signs. He did enjoy torturing animals.
Oh, wow.
He would put a cat in a cooler and leave the lid on and measure how long it would take for the cat to suffocate or die.
Oh, my gosh.
He did have, here's another one of the classic signs, bedwetting. And along with the bedwetting, his mother, now Gary was very conflicted about his mother. It's widely reported, and we have Gary on film talking about this with the detectives who extensively interviewed him after he was captured and confessed. But bedwetting, combined with the humiliation and shame that his mother put on him, was sort of sandwiched together with his sexual attraction to his mother. Gary did talk about that. His mother was a lovely woman who dressed very nicely. And he did say to the detectives that he found her to be sexually interesting, and he wondered what it would be like to have sex with his mother. But he knew that would be wrong. But it didn't stop him from fantasizing. He experienced for many years, being a bedwetter, his mother getting him up in the night, enraged, stripping him down, taking him to the bathtub and scrubbing his genitals. And he said that would arouse him. So there was the anger and shame, humiliation combined with the sexual arousal. And one has to wonder, how that played into his killing, because that involved rage, control, sexual gratification, and then having the power over the woman and ultimately killing her.
Now I'm looking at, I'm going to show the pictures again. There's a lot of, Ted Bundy had a similar type of woman, but I'm looking at some of these pictures, there's different races, different hair colors. So I was curious, if what his mother looked like, if there was any type of resemblance with some of these women that he was trying to, because maybe the sexual attraction, but he was trying to kill them to stop the sexual attraction. I don't, maybe that's something that, or
that's an interesting theory. I think that's a legitimate question. But no, Gary's victims were all vulnerable street workers, sex workers, prostitutes, and young runaways. And I should mention that Gary grew up listening to his father. Remember, he was a Metro bus driver.
Right.
Gary heard his father often complaining about those dang prostitutes, and he spoke about them disrespectfully. And so Gary sort of grew up with the notion that, you know, prostitutes are bad. They're out there trashing up the streets, and it you know, they don't matter. They're not real people. They don't have rights. And so I wonder how that played into him choosing. But Gary did admit that he thought it was safer to prey upon sex workers because he could combine, you know, he could pick up a prostitute and say that he wants to have a date, and he would get the money out and set it on the dash of his truck. But we know that after he killed them, he would take the money back, and he thought that was hilarious. And you're right, the victims look different. They're all different ethnicities, different hair color, different height, different weight. And you're correct, Ted Bundy really went after the brunettes.
Right.
Yeah.
So Judith, was it when it was getting closer to the end where he was, you know, a suspect or started, you know, at the end of his reign of murders, did she start noticing a difference when they started looking for a suspect, or it started closing in on him? Did his mood change, and did she notice a difference at all?
I'm with you. I zoomed in. I questioned her extensively about that because I'm a naturally suspicious, skeptical kind of person, you know, like prove it to me. And so I questioned her extensively about that. So she met Gary and started dating him in 1985. They dated for 2 years. In 1987, he was picked up and interrogated, and they gave him a lie detector test, which he passed. They happened to take a swab of saliva in his mouth and shove it away in a freezer somewhere because in 1987, the DNA science wasn't where it is today, right? So it's just incredible and blows the mind. When Gary was released and came home, he was completely calm, and he explained to Judith, honey, and she said, where did you go? What happened? He told her everything. He told her that he was a suspect. He took a lie detector test. He passed. They asked him all these questions, and they let him go. And he said, you do know they have dozens and dozens of people on their list. And he said, it's probably just routine. You know, let's watch a movie. Let's pop some popcorn. And she drew even closer to him. She appreciated his honesty. She felt that he didn't have anything to hide, and it probably was that they just were asking him some questions and they had the wrong guy.
Wow. To pass a lie detector test, don't you have to be like a sociopath? Or, I mean,
or something.
I mean, because I think I remember hearing that you have to be like a sociopath to actually be able to pass a lie detector. That's crazy to be able to pass that.
I figured out after I did interview Judith for 2 years, as well as coworkers and other people. And what the pieces I put together painted a picture of compartmentalization. This guy could compartmentalize like none other. He could go to work, do a Class A job. He had respect from his coworkers. He was admired for his ability to paint and get the blueprints just right. Stop off after work, pick up a sex worker, take her out, have sex with her, strangle her, kill her, go dispose of the body, and come home. And, well, I think I'm going to start the barbecue. And I think I'm going to take the garbage cans out to the street, out to the curb. He had the ability. I mean, how many of us, just think of the adrenaline. Think of the adrenaline that he dumped from that experience after work. And then to come home and be calm as a cucumber and just continue on with family life. Hi, honey, how was your day? What should we have for dinner?
Right. That just blows my mind. I mean, you hear people like cheating or, go out gambling their paycheck away and come home and act like that, but to actually kill someone and then come home like it was nothing,
like it was nothing. And he didn't, we hear about cheater husbands who overcompensate and come home with a dozen roses.
Right.
And, oh, I love you. I love you more than anyone. And they've been out cheating. He didn't. He had no variation in his behavior. He was so predictable and ordinary.
So when did Judith, when he became suspect, from the time he became a suspect, what was the reason he became a suspect? How did they look at him and say, this is a potential?
Oh, Gary Ridgway was a known John. He was a repeat John. We have a strip of highway called Highway 99 that runs north and south, sort of between Seattle and Tacoma, and it runs in front of the Seattle-Tacoma Airport. And we know that airports attract certain behaviors around that area. So in the 1980s, early 1980s, when he started, there were a lot of prostitutes and crime and things along Highway 99. But that was the pathway that Gary took to and from work every day, up and down Highway 99. And he was a known John. And he had been picked up and questioned a few times because the police suspected that it was perhaps a regular John who was doing this killing, just due to the fact that all of the victims were sex workers and young runaways from that Highway 99 area, also known as the Strip. That was the nickname. And Gary was honest to the police. He said, yeah.
He admitted it.
I pick them up. I have dates. I pay them for sex. Some of those are really nice girls. So he didn't try to hide anything.
Wow. Okay, so that was a suspect, but when did he become the primary? And when did Judith start having her suspicions?
Okay, so as I said earlier, he was picked up in 1987, and they did that extensive interrogation.
Right.
And then they released him because he passed the polygraph test. Judith was so confident that he was a good man that she married him the next year in 1988, 1 year after the interrogation. And again, a year went by, nothing happened. So she thought, okay, everything's fine. It's absolutely nonsense. Gary was always on the suspect list, along with other people. There was a taxi driver that they were hot and heavy after for a long time. But he wasn't actually considered the one until November 30th, 2001, when someone found way in the back of the freezer this little gauze swab that they had taken in. Now 2001 is when they finally got him, but back in 1987 is when they took that saliva sample, and they were able to match up DNA from Gary to some of the victims. Additionally, they found some microscopic flecks of paint on the bodies that matched paint jobs that Gary had done on those Kenworth trucks, 18-wheelers.
Wow. Okay. So that makes sense. I mean, especially DNA. I mean, if he was having, sex with sex workers, and there must have been some type of DNA left over once in a while. So I'm surprised he hadn't been caught earlier with DNA.
I am too. And I've said this to my family numerous times. How does a guy, and Gary was slight of build. He was not a big muscular man.
Right.
So slender, lean. How does a man go out along the Green River, which is populated with fishermen? It's a popular river for fishing. The steelhead come up every winter, and salmon. The salmon come up to spawn, and so it's a really popular fishing area along those banks. It's also a popular floating river. I did it myself.
Oh, really?
When I was
Okay.
a teenager. I lived next to the Green River in my teens. And on hot days, we would get on rubber inner tubes and float down the river. So I've said to my family, like a broken record, what are the odds that a slender guy could go have sex with a prostitute along the riverbanks or in his truck or in the woods, be strong enough to carry her down a slippery edge of a bank, dump her body in the river, and never in 20 years, never be noticed by a fisherman or someone floating by like myself on a hot summer day? What are the odds of that?
Yeah, that is. I mean, that's, I grew up like you. We had rivers and we used to go inner tubing and in fact, not the inner tubing, but my nephews, when they were little boys, it shows you how, especially is Green River, is it fairly decent sized town or is it a...
Oh, no, the river is a river that comes down from the Cascade Mountains and flows through many cities.
Oh, okay.
It dumps out into the ocean.
Well, most of the bodies did he bury them or did he ever throw them into the river?
When he first started, he threw them into the river.
Oh, okay. Did they ever find those bodies?
Yes.
Okay.
And then he started putting them in clusters, numerous bodies in the same place. And then he started expanding away from the river up onto the banks. And then from there, he went out into the forest, which would require a drive going east toward the Cascade Mountain Range, away from Seattle. And he might have been thinking that, there's a less chance of being caught because detectives were scouring the river and the banks.
I'm sure, yeah.
But you mentioned earlier growing up in Wichita, Kansas, and the BTK killer. Do you remember the kind of fear, just a cloud of fear, and everybody's looking at everybody wondering who could it be?
Yeah, I was a young kid, but I remember it being on the news. We were in a smaller town outside of Wichita, but I mean, the people that we knew in Wichita were very scared.
So that's the same thing that we had we call it the Pacific Northwest, all around the Seattle area. In my high school years and beyond high school, I married young, had children young. It was this sort of cloud that just hung over us. And we would say to each other, what if I saw him in the grocery store today? Or is he in jail? Or is he dead? There hasn't been a body in a while. Oh, there's another body. He's still around. And it just became creepier and creepier and creepier. Just the not knowing. And why can't they catch this guy?
What was the conversation like, though? When did he ever confess to Judith before he was arrested?
No, never.
Never.
No, he sat in jail for 2 years. He was arrested November 30th, 2001. And he sat there in King County Jail for 2 years, denying everything. Judith went to visit him. They put their hands up on the glass to each other, said, I love you. He called her regularly. He sent her letters.
Oh, my gosh.
He vehemently denied everything. He said, they got the wrong guy. They got the wrong guy. And she believed him, and she supported him for those 2 years.
But I was going to say, what was that point where she's like, okay, this is not, you're not telling me the truth.
2 years later, when Gary knew he was toast. They had the DNA evidence, and he was in court. It was one of the biggest news days here that I can ever remember in Seattle. Live coverage during the day. And he said, guilty, 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 guilty 49 times.
Really? 49 times for every murder? Yeah.
For every murder. Actually, it was 48 originally. And then after he was incarcerated, he confessed to one more. So that bumped it up to 49. But Judith sat there on her sofa watching live daytime news, watching her husband on the screen saying, guilty, guilty, guilty 49 times. And she just lost it. That's the moment she knew, because she saw him and heard him, saw his face, heard his voice. And that's when her whole world collapsed.
I mean, I couldn't imagine, like, losing your spouse of that many years and your best friend of that many years and somebody you thought you knew. And then, like you said, not just losing him, but having that burden of, 49 plus people that he has, took their lives. How many people do they think maybe that he took? Because he confessed to more. Is that right?
Well, this is kind of tricky, Tony, because Gary got an unprecedented deal. This made history here in Washington. King County is the largest county in Washington State. So the King County prosecutor, Norm Mailing, made a controversial deal. Half the public was for it, half the public was outraged. And he said, look, if you take us out in the forest and help us find more bodies, because we know there's more out there, you've told us, we will give you life in prison instead of the death penalty. And Gary was so afraid of being put to death that he agreed to it. So here's why it's tricky. He could only confess to the bodies found within the boundaries of King County, because within King County is where he could get life in prison, no death.
Right.
But if he confessed to any outside of King County,
then that opens the door for...
Then that opened the door for a whole new trial.
Yeah.
And he could have ended up getting the death penalty. So he did tell detectives later that it was certainly more than 49. He kind of bragged about it. I think at that time, we referred to him as the most prolific serial killer in the U.S. But now I think he's kind of tied with Samuel Little. I had to do a little reading up on him because I wasn't sure who was winning now with most bodies. But Samuel Little confessed in 2014, and he confessed to 93 women, and they were also vulnerable women, street workers, young runaways, and sex workers. But Gary, okay, so now they say Samuel Little is the most prolific serial killer at 93, but I feel really confident that Gary had into the hundreds. He told me that when I interviewed him. He told me, when it got out that many, he was starting to lose track.
Was it, and I know it sounds kind of weird, but was it kind of freeing for him to finally admit these murders? Because like you said, he was kind of bragged about it, but to, keeping it to himself for all those years, killing all these people, and finally saying, yes, I did it, and there's more. Did he come across like it was killing the, a 20-point buck? I mean, like a male ego? I don't know. How was that come across as?
That's such a good question. I don't know if I have the real answer. I don't know. I can't feel his thoughts and feelings. Yeah. He was interesting. Again, that compartmentalization. Gary never felt the need to brag during 20 years of murdering. And you mentioned the BTK killer. Remember how he would taunt the police?
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure. And
write them notes. And so the BTK killer was playing head games with the law enforcement there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gary didn't do that. He just went to work, mowed the lawn, fired up the barbecue, changed the oil in his car. Somehow he was able to just put that aside into a different compartment. But I did watch some of quite a bit of the video footage when the detectives studied him for week after week after week. And at times he did look a little bit, his body language looked a little bit proud. I think he liked that title of most prolific serial killer. And, he struggled in school. One brother was for sure more successful than he in the computer tech, world. And maybe this was a way for Gary to feel like he was a success at something. He held a title.
Wow. I mean, I've seen it in family dynamics before where, one's very successful and one is complete opposite, but yet it seems like they did their best to be not good. Yeah, I've seen it. Even in my family, I've seen it. It's crazy to think
That's
that.
interesting.
Yeah.
And so true. The family dynamics are so complicated. It seems like there's always a star,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an underdog, and there's an agitator. And, psychologists can tell us all about that. But one thing Gary really, really wanted more than anything was respect from his parents, love and respect from his parents.
I think he lost that, though. Were they still alive when he was convicted?
No.
Wow.
They had both passed away before he confessed. So
But when he was arrested, were they alive?
they were.
So he waited till they died before he would confess to it.
Before he was officially, before the evidence was officially linked with him and he was arrested for that last time, November 30th, 2001, parents had already passed away. But you're right, back in 87, when he was picked up and questioned, his parents rallied the family around them. And Judith said her mother-in-law called her and gave her comfort and said, "This is so stupid. I'm so flaming mad at these stupid police, picking on my son for no reason. This is ridiculous. You're going to see that they made a mistake." And then that was reinforced to Judith when he was released, came home, nothing happened.
Well, unfortunately, our time is almost up, and I could talk to you all day about this stuff. It's so interesting. What is Judith? What is she? After writing the book, it's got it exposure. Like you said, you've done a lot of interviews on major television shows. What was this kind of a closure for her also to give this information to you in this book? And what did she do after? How's her life after this?
Thank you for asking about Judith. And because this book really is, while it includes details about the Green River serial killer, It's really a story of her life from birth to now. And she will be 79 years old next month in August. So she's come a long way in healing. I can quote Judith. Here's what she said to me, her exact words. She said, "Pennie, by telling you my story, you pulled the poison out of me." And so telling her story and getting it out there, while it was terrifying for her, and she's still worried for her safety,
I'm sure,
that had the most profound healing for her. And then subsequent to the book, she learned things like living alone, managing her own place, getting a little puppy dog for companionship. And so what has sustained her is her puppy dog, her working in the yard. She has quite a green thumb. And she did join a church, and she has her faith in God and a church family around her. And it did take her a number of years to be able to tell them who she really was.
Did she ever lose her faith? Because that's something to go through and say, "God, why did you put me through this? Why did you give me a man that killed all these people?" I mean, did she ever question God at that?
I think she did. She had a meltdown one day when she was cleaning out the garage, and she found some condoms that Gary had hidden in his toolbox out in the garage. And she completely went into a rage and picked up an axe and just started chopping everything in sight in the garage and just raging at God. Like you just said, how could you let this happen? And why did you take away a husband who was the best part of my life? Out of my entire life, this was the best thing.
Right.
Why? So yes, she did question, and she was angry at God as she was smashing everything in sight with the axe.
Well, like people said in the chat room, thoughts and prayers for Judith, and blessings to you, Miss Pennie Wood, because we appreciate you doing the work. Because that, not only for Judith, but a lot of people wouldn't be able to sit there and be able to ask those questions. And I'm sure you got emotional sometimes too, because that's hard to not get entwined in that emotions of her heartache. Did you?
I got entwined, and what I noticed is every time I left her place after an interview, I had a terrible headache.
I'm sure.
I felt ill, physically ill.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. I couldn't even imagine to hear those stories. And then what was it like, before we get out of here, what was it like in meeting Gary for the first time? Because that would be, I don't know, that would be interesting it's like, meeting Charles Manson for the first time, just looking into an eyes of a serial killer. I mean, I couldn't imagine that feeling.
Oh, Tony, I have to tell you, they would not allow me to see him face to face. We had to talk over the telephone.
Oh, okay. It's probably even better.
So it was telephone, and it was his voice, and I was expecting a monster, and it was like I was chatting with my next door neighbor over the fence about the weather. He was so casual, calm, and friendly, and polite. He was so polite to me.
Wow. Well, I think I'm going to have you back, because we may have to get in, because I'm curious to see how, even Judith's doing it, and also how it affected you even these years later, because, something like that may not have happened to you personally, but just being around somebody, or the stories to how it affected you years after that. So we may have to have you back if you don't mind.
If you want to do a part 2, there's a lot more to cover.
Oh, yeah. So, well, how do people find your book and find you?
Oh, thank you. My website is penniewood.com, and that's PENNIE Wood, WOOD.com, penniewood.com. And my book is everywhere. Amazon is where most people go, but all the booksellers have it.
Oh yeah, and please pick up this book. I think you're going to see a emotional roller coaster of Miss Judith, and also Pennie's take on that journey. So, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And please, everybody, go buy the book, and then please support us every Friday. I'm here every Friday doing a show. Robert Hensley's doing a Minuteman Report on Monday at 3 o'clock. Bonnie Burkert is doing a show every Wednesday, Truth Be Told Transformation. So we have content for you all week long, and we hope that you enjoy it. But until next time, I'm Tony Sweet, and please subscribe, share, and don't forget to go to our audio podcast on Apple, iHeart, Spotify, and all those places. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media: Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio; Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.